keep your headphones away from your microphones so that we do not cause problems for our very valued interpreters who are helping out today. Before we get to an opening statement from Mr. Clark, I just want to hand the floor over to Mrs. Vignola for about a minute or so about a very important anniversary. Go ahead, Mrs. Vignola.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
I'm not seeing the live feed.
Donc, merci beaucoup de prendre le temps de me laisser.
Thank you very much allowing me to speak. I'd like to take a moment to remember September 11th, and I think we should remember the Canadians and Americans who were lost on that sad day. My parliamentary assistant experienced it because he was part of the Quebec delegation in New York, and he was to have been at a meeting in these buildings. And he was there at that moment, which we hope to never see again. Thank you.
We appreciate your words. Mr. Clark, we're going to hand things over to you for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Please go ahead, sir. You're on mute, Mr. Clark. Sorry, Mr. Clark, if you can hear me, you're on mute.
Got it.
There we go.
My apologies. You would think I would know something about this. Let me refer to my opening statement. Mr. Chair and committee, first of all, good afternoon, and let me start by commending this committee for taking up this matter. When governments sell and buy official residence involving millions of dollars, parliamentary scrutiny is completely understandable. At a time when many Canadians, and including many Americans, are facing housing challenges, they have the right to know why and how decisions are made to buy and sell official accommodations. Canadians have the right to know if these transactions result in value for money and how or if they advance Canadians' interests. And parliamentarians are the right people to pose those questions and to get those answers, and I hope to be helpful in that endeavor today. I have the honor of leading Canada's Consulate General in New York, a role that I took up on February 27th, 2023. This is one of Canada's most significant diplomatic posts. It is responsible for 5 states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Delaware, and also the island of Bermuda. This region has a combined GDP of more than $6 trillion and two-way trade with Canada of more than $200 billion a year. Rien qu'à New York, il y a environ 300,000 résidents.
In New York alone, there are 300,000 Canadians resident. Our consulate provides for them government services that are essential, including emergency consular service.
Of the American media capital, where opinions that Americans have of Canada are often formed and created and amplified. Mon travail englobe tous ces aspects et bien plus encore.
My work includes all these aspects and even more. The consulate is there to promote and defend Canadian interests, for example, in terms of trade and investment, and deals with various bilateral questions at the municipal level, the state level, and the federal government level.
Tools to do the job. I am assigned a residence both to live and to use for work. That means using it for certain types of meetings, receptions, and dinners. It is Canada's house in New York. Since I arrived, I have held 38 events at the residence. Most recently, last week, I had a reception for New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and his delegation on the eve of their trade and political mission to Canada, with visits to Ontario and Quebec. Other events, such as dinners, have centered around venture capital, private equity, political outreach, AI, public policy, and the arts. As you have already heard in testimony from Global Affairs Canada officials, I had no role whatsoever in either deciding to sell the former residence or buying the new one. That was completely undertaken by the Property Bureau in Ottawa. I was not involved in the selection of the new property, its amenities, or its location. And as you have heard, this project will return millions of dollars to Canadian taxpayers, which I'm sure all of you think is a good thing. I also want to let you know why I was unavailable on August 27th when you first invited me to speak with you. I was on leave with my children and my grandchildren. I am very pleased that the committee and thankful to the committee to accommodate my appearance today. Finally, I would like to tell you why I accepted this job as Consul General in the first place. After a 45-year career in broadcasting and 5 years as a senior business executive, I was looking for an opportunity to give back because I believe that anyone who has done well because of Canada, or in my case, because of Canadians, should give something back to the country that gave them so much. This job allows me to do just that, using my experience and my personal networks in the service of Canada. I am extremely proud of the work my team here in New York does for Canadians, advancing and protecting their interests every single day. Mr. Chairman, I now look forward to answering any questions that the members may have.
Thanks, Mr. Clark. We'll start with Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Clark, how long were you residing in the old residence?
How long was I residing? Well, from the time I arrived, February 27th, 2023, until today.
The listing for that property describes it as a masterpiece. Is that right? Is that how it's described?
I know nothing about real estate.
Well, you're here to talk about it today, so I hope you're prepared to turn your mind to it. The Prime Minister visited you in New York City on April 27th of that year that you moved in. Is that right?
I believe that's correct. He was here on a mission. Yep.
Did you host the Prime Minister in the residence?
I did.
Did you show him around?
Around the residence? No.
Yeah. No, you didn't show him around.
Nope.
What did he comment on the look of it?
No.
So, but to confirm that on April 27th, you and the Prime Minister were in the residence that was deemed unfit for you to continue living in. That's correct. You were there April 27th.
Yeah, along with about 80 other people.
And on April 28th, you were in the limo with him in New York. Is that right? The next day?
That's correct.
So, were there any conversations regarding renovations, upgrade, moving, the former occupants of that condo, or you now occupying it? Any change in discussions regarding which representative in New York was occupying that space? Did that come up at all?
None whatsoever.
So we have government documents that detail how talks on getting a new residence intensified immediately after the Prime Minister visited you. You asked him for a new place, is that right?
That's incorrect.
So you're in the motorcade with the Prime Minister after he was just in this place that's deemed unfit for you to continue to live in, and you never said, look, buddy, thanks for the job. I could use a new jeweled onyx powder room and a handcrafted copper tub.
No, I did not.
How much representational space is there in the new residence?
Representational space would represent the majority of the space in the new residence.
Okay, that's interesting. So the dining room, living room, jeweled onyx powder room come to about 860 square feet. Does that sound about right to you? That's what the listing says.
I have no idea about square feet. I would refer you to the property division at Global Affairs who handles this.
So that leaves about 2,700 square feet for your personal use, 860 for representational, 2,700 for your personal use. So Canadians are on the hook for paying $9 million for 860 square feet when a perfectly good joint representational space is available at the same property that you're joining us at from today. Is that right?
I, I, your numbers can't be right because that does not represent reality.
Okay, so what is the percentage of representational space in the new location? Please bring us back to reality.
That is a question, Mr. Chair, that should be addressed to the Property Division at Global Affairs Canada.
Well, you had a great deal of certainty to tell me that I'm wrong, but you certainly don't know on what basis I am. I'm referring to exactly the documents that were provided to us by the department that you're now referring me to. GAC's real estate agent told us that you personally visited the new luxury condo once the selection had been made. Was this a final vetting?
Not at all. It was after the offer had been made to buy it that I first saw it.
Did you ever take a moment, as someone who spent a career in journalism, to question the Prime Minister or anyone on the opulence of this location amid the backdrop of the cost of living crisis that we're facing here in Canada? StatsCan saying that 1 in 4 Canadians are going to be using food banks to feed themselves and their families this month. Did that ever occur to you?
As I said in my opening statement, Mr. Chair, I am well aware of the challenges being faced by both Canadians and Americans when it comes to housing. In this case, I was not involved in any way, shape, or form in the decision to buy this new residence or sell the old residence. And that is entirely in the hands of the Property Division of Global Affairs.
When you host functions at the event, do you personally prepare the food? Is it done by your personal chef, or are these events catered?
I do not have a personal chef, nor do I cook the food, thankfully.
So these are catered affairs, because we were told by the Real Property Division that the necessity for this was that the shared space that you have at the office that you're in now wasn't suitable to host functions because there wasn't a kitchen to prepare meals. So if the meals are being brought in, couldn't they be brought into your office that you're speaking to us from now?
The bylaws of New York City prohibit us from having a working kitchen in the office. It would be illegal, in fact, for us to put a working kitchen in this office.
If it's catered, it seems moot whether or not you have a kitchen in there. We've been told that you're responsible for all of the trade success between Canada and the United States. Can you tell us exactly, just the number, how much trade business you have generated for Canada? Just the number, sir.
First of all, Mr. Chair, I don't know where or who said that I was responsible for all the trade between Canada and the United States.
Since you don't have the number, I'm out of time. Canadians want to know. Well, you're the $9 million man. They want to know what the value is for Canadians. Sir, keep your bags packed in that new place. Conservatives are going to fire you.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. We're going to go to Mr. Jawari for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, let me welcome Mr. Clark. Thank you for coming to the committee, and thank you for clarifying a number of things. And I strongly suggest you do not unpack anything. We need you. We need you now more than ever. So let me start by a couple of very clarifying questions that you have had an opportunity to put on the record, just for me to also put it on the record. Mr. Clark, did you have anything to do with the purchase of the new residence and the sales or disposition of the old residence?
Nothing whatsoever.
Thank you. Did you at any time talk to anyone regarding a desire for relocation?
Never.
Did anyone talk to you about the need for the move at any point, at any level?
I was aware as the head of mission that there were discussions going on with the Property Division. I was not part of those discussions. I did not involve myself in them in any sort of way.
Thank you. You mentioned the head of a mission. So let's talk about the mission. Let's talk about the great work that the mission is doing and the one that you're leading. You talked about that the diplomatic post in New York is responsible for 5 states. You mentioned it's responsible for $6 trillion worth of opportunity, and you talked about $200 billion in current trade that's happening. Just for Canadians, Canada's GDP usually is around 2.2, 2.1, 2.2 trillion. So the mission is actually responsible for a trade in the order of 3 orders of magnitude. Do you want to make any comment on the size of the opportunity that exists for Canada?
Yeah, I want to make it very clear that any success that we have had in terms of trade with our region and with Canada is not because of me solely. I am merely part of a team down here that has done remarkable work. Let me give you a few examples because I think this was asked for in a previous question. We since April 2022, which is the last numbers that we have until now, we have made 65 foreign direct investment referrals to communities in Canada, including 161 economic outcomes for Canada, 35 new partnerships, and multiple investor visits to Canada and facilitated investments, including, as I said last week, the visit of Governor Murphy from New Jersey. These are very positive results that are being made by the mission and the people here at the mission.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You also talked about some of the border provinces that really heavily rely on you and the mission to be able to facilitate a lot of conversation with their counterparts in U.S. Can you shed some light on that one for us, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We host regularly ministers from the Ontario government, from the Quebec government. As you say, these are sort of the border provinces to my territory. But we've also had visits from the Premier of Prince Edward Island. It really is key for Canada that the supply chain in particular on some critical matters, whether it be critical minerals, energy in particular, which is a big issue here, directly affects the trade between Canada and the United States, but more particularly the trade from those 2 provinces and the 5 states that I represent here. So we do outreach into Canada, but more importantly, we encourage people, we encourage all politicians, in fact, to come down to New York to tell our story, help us tell the story.
Yeah, thank you. You talked about, it's interesting, you talked about you encourage all the politicians from all parties to come to Canada. I was looking at the document that was provided by Global Affairs Canada, and I would thank you for all of this information. And there were quite few names, politicians from all colors, and including the former Conservative leader of the official opposition, Mr. Erin O'Toole, Manitoba former Conservative Minister of Finance, Conservative Premier of PEI. Can you talk about the portfolio of these politicals across the spectrum, political individuals across the spectrum, and what their focus area is when they come to New York, and who did they meet with? What kind of facilitation do you do? And I only got 45 seconds, so I yield the floor to you for the rest of the time.
I'll be very brief. When they come down, they are meeting with investors on Wall Street, and we have very good connections there. We put provinces and investors together along with their own teams who have got deep understanding of the economic opportunities in New York for provinces. In the case of Mr. O'Toole, I just decided that here is somebody who has probably some wisdom to impart, and so I invited him over for a meal at the residence because I thought that was the right thing to do. And at that point, Mr. Chair, I'm probably out of my time.
Yeah, with 5 seconds, I yield the rest to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Vignola. You're up next. You have 6 minutes and 2 extra seconds from Mr. Jouari. Go ahead, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clark, for joining us today. One little reminder. I'm not sure I quite understood in the questions being put to you, but when were you informed for the first time that Global Affairs was looking for a new residence? Well, Ms. Vignola, I will try to answer the questions in French, but if I can't manage, I may speak English from time to time. the first time, it was the 26th of April. That was the first visit I made to the residence, and the first time I learned that there was interest in buying this property was April 12th. So it was quite soon after you took up your duties and after the visit of the Prime Minister. Now, if I can may make a correction, it was April in April 2024. Thank you for that. No, I wasn't aware of your career, so I had to look into it. With 39 million people, we can't know them all. But in the various comments I read about you, many were quite flattering. And others said you were a liberal media personality who belonged to the Laurentian elite. So you are a media personality, but are you liberal? Are you a member of the Laurentian elite? And what is this elite? And how did you become consul? Was it your professional past? Was it your liberal ideology or being a member of the Laurentian elite?
Pendant le 45.
Thank you. During the 45 years I was a journalist, I was never a liberal, a conservative, a New Democrat, or a member of the Bloc Québécois. I've never lived in the Laurentians. I was never a member of the elite. The only thing I did during those years that was political was to deal with a Congress for the election of the Conservative leader. That was a service I provided. This didn't mean I was conservative. I'm not a liberal or conservative. I'm neither liberal, conservative, nor New Democrat. Thank you. You talked about moderating, having these roles of moderating, of being a moderator. In what capacity? Well, the Conservative Party asked me. I'm going to answer in English and then in French, if you will.
Leadership debates. I charged nothing for this. This was not a paid gig. I felt that it was a service. I believe in engagement and democracy. And I felt that from time to time, journalists who have the ability to do this sort of thing should be doing it to increase it. It is not an endorsement for any party or any candidate. It is simply a way of participating in the democratic process. I thought it was the right thing to do, and I did it twice, never for any other party other than the Conservatives.
Merci beaucoup. Le 21 août 2024, une fonction.
Thank you. In August 2024, it was said that the Minister of Global Affairs was not involved in the acquisition of this residence and was only informed in June 2024. Why why did your team inform the Minister of Global Affairs of this acquisition only after? Is this a usual practice?
Au début de cette
Well, I wasn't part of the process.
I was not involved in the process. I did not know when the minister was informed or not informed. That was never in my line of sight ever.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to beautiful British Columbia. Mr. Backrack, go ahead, please, sir.
Actually, in beautiful Montreal this morning. I wish I was back home in British Columbia, but on the road and going to be seeing everyone in Ottawa starting Monday. Mr. Clark, thanks for joining our committee and appreciate your remarks so far. And I appreciate you recognizing the importance of this conversation, given that we're in a housing crisis and given that for a lot of Canadians, $9 million for a condo in New York seems like a lot of money, and people may not be familiar with the role of your office and the importance to our trade relations with the United States. Now, I'm interested in starting, my colleagues have asked important questions about the timing of things, and I think we're getting a little bit better sense of how this decision was made. I'm wondering if you can talk about the longer-term investment in Canada's diplomatic corps and how that has changed over time. Now, I understand you're relatively new to this role, but you obviously talk to other people in the diplomatic corps and probably have a sense of where we stand at this current moment when it comes to investing. I don't think anyone would deny that in order to be effective in these roles, the government has to invest in them. And we've seen different decisions made by different governments over time. Where do we stand now, and where have we been in the past?
I am, as you say, the wrong person to ask about history, but I can perhaps be helpful talking about what I have been able to see here during my time here. And that is that when we invest in diplomacy, we get results. When we do it properly, and that is to say efficiently, using money as wisely as we possibly can, it increases the effectiveness of what we would do or what we are doing. I really don't have many views. I haven't seen our other residences or offices. I did as a journalist when I traveled the world. And I think that I guess what I would say is this: we are a G7 country. We are important on the world stage. We are going to be even more important on the world stage as we transition in many, many areas of production. And I think that we have to understand that while our friends are our friends in the G20 and the G70, they're also our competitors here in places like New York. They're after the same pie that I'm after. So that we have to be nimble, we have to be effective, we have to do it as best we can, keeping the taxpayer in mind and understanding that the more efficient that we can be, the better we are.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Clark. I think the concept of efficiency is a challenging one when we're talking about what to many people seems like a luxury condo in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. But I am interested in this comparison between Canada's representation in New York and that of our competitors, our peer countries, other G7 countries and beyond. You obviously visit the residences of other people in similar positions. How does Canada's representation in New York stack up when it comes to our peer countries?
I would say overall, we're probably lower middle in terms of our presence here. If you're looking at residences, recently the UK spent $22 million to buy their residence. I believe Italy spent $35 million. And yes, we have spent $9 million, but we are returning as much as 7 or even perhaps more millions of dollars to the Canadian taxpayer. So that has to be taken into account as well.
And in your intro remarks, you mentioned emergency consular services, which is an aspect of the role that you play and the role of this particular property, I understand. Could you expand on what those emergency services are and how it would work for someone who's in New York and requiring emergency consular services? Would they visit the residence? Is it a property that accepts Canadian citizens who are in New York and in need of help? How does that work?
If you're in need of help in New York, the last thing you want to do is come to the residence. What you need is the help of our terrific consular team here. As I said in my opening remarks, we have 300,000 Canadians who live here. We've got thousands and thousands more who come to visit for Broadway or sports or just to see New York City. Some of them get into difficulty. We help them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We help them with the authorities. We help them with lost passports. We help them get through what are very difficult times. And I can tell you our consular division here is, I think, superb. But they offer service to Canadians that is indispensable for those who find themselves in difficulty in New York.
I don't doubt that they do. What I'm interested in is the specific role of the residents in providing those emergency consular services.
No, the residence does not play a role. We have many Canadians who come to the residence, but not Canadians who are in distress.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now go to Mr. Brock. We'll start our 5-minute rounds. Go ahead, Mr. Brock, please.
Mr. Clark, although you have not been sworn or affirmed to tell the truth, every witness that testifies at parliamentary committee is expected to tell the truth. Have you, sir, told the truth to the committee so far?
I have, every word of it.
I have a package of emails from the government, emails from the Chief of Staff to the Assistant Deputy Minister of Trudeau's Minister of Global Affairs, Melanie Jolie. She wrote a summary of the $9 million condo purchase. The email states, and I quote, "Both the Consul General of New York and the head of mission," that's you, Tom Clark, "have been instrumental throughout the process with the head of mission," again, you, Mr. Clark, "providing the green light for the selection of the new residence. It is in writing by the department. Tom Clark, you, sir, was instrumental in the condo purchase on Billionaires Row." So again, Mr. Clark, when did you raise the need for a new residence with the Liberal government?
Mr. Chair, I will repeat, I had no role whatsoever in deciding to sell the old residence, buying the new residence, or its amenities, or its location. That email that you're referring to has a couple of addendums to it that I think are important. Number one, it was corrected. That was a person who was not involved in the process of this. I only became aware of this email less than 48 hours ago. I, too, was taken aback by what was in it because it was simply wrong. It wasn't true.
Mr. Clark, let me stop you right there. I don't believe you. Canadians don't believe you. Are you trying to suggest that a head of mission in any country in the world would be completely shut out, would be completely uninvolved with the acquisition of your own residence? No Canadian believes you, sir. This was not a typo. This was a deliberate, focused sentence regarding your involvement. And the timing, sir, is crucial. The email I referenced was sent out June 17th, 2024. The story of the $9 million condo on Billionaires Row became known to the Canadian public on July the 11th. That was a huge embarrassment to the Canadian government, and I'm sure a huge embarrassment to you, Mr. Clark. Your involvement was documented well before. We have the receipts. The department's pathetic attempt to cover up for you was issued on July 25, after all of the controversy, after all of the pushback from politicians, from Canadians who are struggling to put a roof over their head, who are lined up at food banks, who are starving. People who go to the food banks were actually, donating to the food banks. And you're sitting on Billionaires Row, sipping coffee from a $6,000 coffee machine. You can appreciate how appalling that is to Canadians. So again, sir, I ask for honesty. When did you bring up the need for a new residence?
Mr. Chair, I will repeat once again, and please, if you wish, you can put me under oath on this. I had nothing to do with the decision to sell the old OR. I had nothing to do with the decision to buy the new OR. I had nothing to do with deciding on amenities or its location.
It's funny, Mr. Clark, 19 previous consul generals to New York since 1961 have all enjoyed the lavish amenities, the wonderful location in Midtown Manhattan of the Park Avenue residence until you, sir, were appointed to the position. And within months, sir, of you appointing the position, and within months of Justin Trudeau visiting you and you hanging out in a motorcade in downtown New York with streets closed, all of a sudden, there's a talk about a new residence and a push to get you into Billionaires Row. You said at the outset you'd rather be in Central Park. Now you're overlooking Central Park. You got your wish, sir.
Mr. Brock, I am not overlooking Central Park.
Okay.
I am
I'm
not
sorry,
in
Mr.
a
Clark.
tower.
I have to interrupt. That is our time, but I think you'll probably have a chance to respond for our next intervention, Mr. Baines. I'm going to assume you are in beautiful British Columbia, at least. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Clark, for joining us today, and thank you for your service. As you know, Richmond, British Columbia is a border community and a hub for goods and travel across North America and to the Asia Pacific. The efficiency of flow of goods and services, it's something that's critical to the growth of not only our city, but the wider BC economy and the Canadian economy. How does your mission in New York facilitate trade relations between Canada and the United States? We also share a coastline, so clean waterways come to top of mind, and those kinds of conversations and dialogues that need to happen. How involved are you in those conversations and the work that needs to be done there? And if you want to clarify before you get to your answer on that, about the communique that was passed along, which you said there were several amendments to that were incorrect. Maybe clarify that, and then you can, if you will, please get to my question.
Sure, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it very clear, because I think we need to have facts on the table here. This new residence does not overlook Central Park. It is on the 11th floor. It overlooks West 57th Street in New York City. In terms of that email, as I said, I was only made aware of this less than 48 hours ago, taken aback, clearly didn't represent anything that was going on. In that package that you have, there is an explanation from Global Affairs Canada as to why that was incorrect and why that was publicly corrected. But the testimony of GAC officials and of myself stands without question that I was not involved in any part of the process. Getting to the core of your question of what we do, I'd just like to point out that in the way we facilitate trade is not just sitting in New York City and talk to people here, although that's a very important part of what we do. It is also getting out into our territories, going into the small towns, talking to the local chambers of commerce, talking to people on the streets in coffee shops and letting them know who we are and finding out what they're thinking about. Since I arrived here, I've conducted 14 such outreach visits throughout my territory, resulting in 70 different meetings. I can tell you where they all were, but also I've gone to Washington, D.C. a number of times, again, to speak to federal members who are in Washington who represent the area that I am responsible for. So when I talk about facilitating trade, it is both in terms of trying to find for Canadian companies and try to facilitate for Canadian companies to find those investors here in New York who may be able to help them either expand in the United States or expand in Canada, creating jobs for Canadians. And similarly, we deal with Americans who want to send money to Canada to build plants to create jobs for Canadians. And that's essentially, that is the core of what we're trying to do. We are trying to increase not only the trade, but to put it another way, increase the wealth for Canadians, increase the number of jobs for Canadians, because after all, nothing in the end is more important than that.
Thank you for that. And I'll continue on that line of questioning. And I assure you I won't bully or intimidate like my members across the way who seem to be inspired by the recent American presidential debate and wanting to fire people. Can you speak to your plans going into the fall and the new year for growing Canada's business footprint in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of things coming up that we're extraordinarily proud of. Last year, we started our first conference on critical minerals here in New York. What we did is we invited down junior miners from Canada, people who have got known deposits of critical minerals, and we brought them together with investors here in the United States to see if we could make a match. I'm pleased to say that, you know, in most business dealings, as anybody involved in business will tell you, it doesn't happen overnight. This is a process. Investment is a process. And along the lines, we're there to try and accelerate that, to try and widen the opportunities for those investments to be made. But at that conference on critical minerals last year, right there, I think there were one or two investment deals made. We're looking for patient capital here in New York. Patient capital is important for critical minerals, and that's important for us. And then going ahead, we have a number of what we call CTAs. Climate Tech Accelerators is a very big one for us, bringing down Canadian technology, looking for investors in the energy transition mode. We do this for a whole range of industries, but climate tech is a very big one coming up in Climate Week here in New York later this month, as a matter of fact.
Thank you,
Looking
gentlemen.
forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. That is our time. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Clark, you say that there are mechanisms to avoid political interference in the acquisition of real estate for global affairs. Now, I believe that there should be places worldwide where we can create relationships and do representational work. Now, $9 million, this is a tidy sum, to say the least. How can you make sure, how can you be really sure that taxpayers' money has been properly invested without there being the shadow of a doubt of any kind of interference? How can you manage this?
Tout d'abord, tous les gens doivent...
Well, first of all, everyone has to tell the truth. And I think that it is the case that we've been telling the truth. $9 million, it is, I think, for Canadians, a tidy sum. But you have to remember that when we sell the other residents, Canadians will get back at least $7 million. So we're not only buying a residence, we're selling another residence. And experts at Global Affairs who deal with property acquisition, they are the experts, not I. Thank you very much, Chair. How much time have I left?
Bear with me, as my timer's going. You have about 30 seconds.
OK, excellent.
Thank you. Great. Can you explain very quickly why there are receptions that are organized in the official residence rather than the consulate? Does one have advantages over the other? Excellent question, and allow me to explain in English to be accurate.
Or it's always and. I have a range of tools that I can use. The mission here is one, the residence is another, traveling is another. You choose which is most appropriate for the moment and for the occasion. In the residence, it is more intimate, it is more secure, and a lot of people we entertain there appreciate the security of the residence. But you know, larger events may be best held in the mission. But as I said,
Clark,
it's not one or the other.
I apologize, Mr. Clark. I have to cut you off there because we're quite a bit past our time, but thanks very much. Mr. Backrack, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark, you referred to this communique that indicated that you did, in fact, have a role in the selection of the new apartment. And then you referred to the amendments there too by Global Affairs officials. And for people who are following along and perhaps watching the webcast of this meeting, could you characterize the rationale for the amendments for, in your own words, for folks who are watching?
Sure. The memo that you're referring to, or the email that you're referring to, was simply wrong. These things happen. People get things wrong. All the other documents that you have point the other direction. So this is unfortunate. It was unfortunate for the person who wrote it because it was simply wrong. I mean, what can I tell you? It's not what happened.
It's just hard to imagine someone writing a memo and including information that has absolutely no basis. I can't imagine, I'm thinking about officials that are writing these memos, and I'm struggling to understand why someone would put something in there when it's entirely unfactual. Do we know who wrote the memo, who was responsible for that fairly grievous oversight?
Yes, we do. It's in the package. Nothing is redacted in that, by the way. And her name is Emily Nicholson. I have not ever met Emily Nicholson or spoken to Emily Nicholson, but I share with you the astonishment that something would be written that is so completely wrong.
Mr. Chair, perhaps it would be appropriate for the committee to invite Ms. Nicholson to appear as part of this study and provide, in her own words, her rationale for writing the original memo in the way that she did. If that's in order, I would make that a motion at this time.
Yep. Colleagues,
or
Mr.
maybe we can do it by unanimous consent.
Yeah, we seem to have agreement with that, so leave it with myself and the clerk. Thanks, Mr. Backrack. You've got about 5 seconds.
I'll hand those seconds back to you, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Backrack. We're now going to go to Mrs. Kusi for 5. Then we're going to take a very short suspension so we can do a voice check for Mr. Hardy. And then we'll continue with Mr. Hardy. Go ahead, Mrs. Kusi.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Clark, it's very concerning because there are some inconsistencies in the timelines and the testimony that you are giving the committee today. So I'm just going to outline the first one that is very concerning to me as well as the committee. So you get appointed in February of 2023. Then we see you in a motorcade April 28th of 2023 with the Prime Minister, the individual who does the appointments. And in that video, in the motorcade, you say that, in fact, the Prime Minister was over at your place the evening before, the residence of the 27th. And then, lo and behold, Global Affairs Canada, that had put the project of a new residence on hold, all of a sudden, after your appointment, your dinner with the Prime Minister, and then being in the motorcade with the Prime Minister, Global Affairs Canada decides that there are issues with the current residence and that it is time to look for a new residence, apparently a $9 million residence. Isn't that convenient? So can you elaborate for the committee again, please? What was your implication in discussing the new residence with the department and with the Prime Minister? When did you first bring it up with the Prime Minister? Because the chronology would definitely, the chronological timeline would definitely indicate that you had conversations with the Prime Minister about the residence. Because isn't that funny that you would be appointed, you would have dinner with the Prime Minister, you would be in a motorcade with the Prime Minister, and lo and behold, Global Affairs Canada decides that it's time for a new residence after that visit. Isn't that funny? So just tell the committee now when you had the conversations with the Prime Minister about the new residence, because that's what happened. Isn't that right, Mr. Clark?
No, Mr. Chair, it's completely wrong. I never spoke with the Prime Minister about the old residence or the new residence or any residence. The Prime Minister was not over at the residence for dinner. It wasn't just he and I. There were about 80 people there, including the mayor of New York City and including the head of BlackRock Investments, as well as a number of other people. But the core of your question is, when did I or did I ever speak to anybody about this? The answer is unequivocally no.
Well, Mr. Clark, it's very hard for myself to believe this. It's very hard for this committee to be this. So let's stop the lying. I'm going to go to another timeline, which is just not very supportive of your testimony that you have not had these conversations with the Prime Minister. Okay, so there's an email from internal to Global Affairs Canada stating your involvement, outlining your involvement, that's sent on June 17th of this year. All of a sudden, in the media, which I know is your friend, a story breaks on July 11th of the $9 million condo purchase. Then this email, this internal email, is sent on July 25th, which shows that you personally have greenlighted this project. And lo and behold, this July 25th, or correcting it on July 25th, further to the July 11th email, which highlights your greenlighting. But this July 25th email, lo and behold, it is one day after the committee passes the motion demanding your appearance. So again, this is another timeline which is very damning to your evidence, to your testimony here today, Mr. Clark. So why don't we just stop the lying? When did you have a conversation with the Prime Minister about the necessity for a new residence? Just tell the committee, please.
You know, Mr. Chair, when we get to the point of accusing people of lying, I think that we are in very, very dangerous territory here. I will state once again for the member, I had nothing to do with the decision to sell the old residence or to buy the new residence. I did not speak to the Prime Minister about either of those transactions. Ever.
Have the documents, Mr. Clark. We have the documents that indicate that you personally greenlighted this project. And lo and behold, so conveniently, after your time with the Prime Minister back in 2023, shortly after he appointed you, we know that you have had conversations with the Prime Minister about purchasing this $9 million residence on the backs of Canadians. And now we have the email trail that proves that as well. You have tried to cover it. Global Affairs Canada has tried to cover it, but the email paper trail does not lie. And so I'm not buying this. This committee isn't buying this, Mr. Clark, and Canadians aren't buying it.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sorry, let me interrupt for a sec. That is our time We'll do your point of order, then we'll suspend quickly so we can get Mr. Hardy checked voice-wise. Go ahead, Mr. Shore.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that Ms. Kuzi wants to use the term "we" and the committee.
Is he setting a standing order in this point of order, Chair?
Yeah,
Please
this
let him
is
finish the point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Shore.
Thank you. I just take point with the fact that not every member of this committee is of the same opinion as Ms. Kuzi
Which
is.
standing order is he citing in this point of order?
Thank you,
which
Michael.
rule was violated?
Genuous, please let him. Are you finished, Mr. Jari?
Yeah, so just wanted to be on the record. The Liberals are not in the same opinion as Ms. Kuzi is.
Is this a point of order?
I appreciate that. We're going to suspend for a few moments so we can check, voice check Mr. Hardy. Just a few minutes. Patience, Mr. Hardy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead. And welcome to OGGO, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a fellow recovering broadcaster, Mr. Clark, I think it's always worthwhile to look at the current situation and then look for normative information. Is this new? And in fact, it isn't. I want to quote a 2010 media report at a time when we're trying to recover from the financial collapse. The report said as follows: federal spending on Canadian embassy properties and diplomatic residences abroad soared 430% since Stephen Harper's Conservative government came to power on a promise to rein in the diplomatic decorators. After years of trying to move from owning embassies to leasing them, Foreign Affairs is now building a number of new ones, including in Moscow, 8.3 million, Damascus, 6.4 million, Prague, 4.8 million, Dhaka, Bangladesh, 4.2 million, and Stockholm, 4 million. The media report went on to say, construction of a new embassy in Pakistan has already cost more than $7 million just for the land and preliminary plans. The largest single embassy project detailed in the public accounts in 2009 was in Kabul, as Canada prepared to withdraw from its combat mission in Afghanistan and expand its civilian presence there. Spending on the project in the past year, that is in 2009, topped $20 million, including $9 million for renovations, $11 million to buy property, and another 1.4 million to clear it of possible landmines. So this is kind of the history of what has gone on in the past. Next to that, the situation in New York in this age of rage, as we're witnessing this morning, seems to be quite mild. And so I wanted to turn back to you, Mr. Clark, to talk about the importance of the efforts that Canada makes. We saw U.S. protectionism under President Trump. It's not out of the question that we can see more protectionism, or at least moves in that direction, under whichever administration we have after November. Can you talk about the value and the depth and scope of the relationship building, and why perhaps operating out of a no-tell motel somewhere in the precinct of New York City wouldn't necessarily send the right message to the people that we're basically trying to reach? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think one of the ways to explain that is to take a look at the 5 states that I am responsible for. And in each one of those 5 states, Canada is the #1 customer of theirs. In other words, we buy more from these states than the 3 other buyers, Japan, China, France, the European Union combined. So we are extraordinarily important to these states in that also about 70% of the stuff that we send down to the United States ends up as inputs into American products. We are so closely integrated. And I think that the challenge for Canada is to continue to talk to American legislators of either party and say that we have become so integrated that to try and separate that not only would be hugely costly and almost impossible to do from a regulatory point of view, but it'd be dumb, quite frankly, because it would hurt both Canada and the United States. We're entering into an era now, and this is what I often say, is that the route to the Americans achieving their goals and what they want to do runs right through Canada. And for Canada to achieve our goals, our road runs through the United States. It is no longer a question of buy America or buy Canada. It should be buy North America. We have to be thinking in terms of resilient supply chains. We have to be thinking in terms of the next time the world gets knocked down by a pandemic or a war, all of these things are possible, that we have supply chains that can literally be accessed within a couple of hours because we're literally just up the road. And we have in Canada the materials that are so necessary for the next phase of the global economy. We're in a terrific position in this country. It's a question of us seizing the opportunities that are there. And that is really the bulk of our work, regardless of the outcome of the American election. Is it possible to say that we have good friends in the United States?
Oh,
we have extremely good friends in the United States, and this has been one of the big takeaways for me as I travel around and I meet so many American politicians, business leaders, and so on. It's hard to find somebody who doesn't like Canada. Great. Well, let's hope the age of rage is coming to an end and we can get on with being civil to each other internationally as well as domestically. Mr. Chair, that's all the time I need. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Mr. Genuis, please, for 5.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Clark, it's clearly on the record that you toured the new residence. Could you tell us, please, when you first toured the new residence?
I have that here, Mr. Chair. It was April 26th, after the offer to buy had been made.
April 26th of, okay. So
Yeah.
An offer had been put in, but the purchase hadn't been finalized. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. What, from your perspective, was the purpose of that tour?
As head of mission, I was aware that this was going on. Once the offer had been made, I was curious.
Okay. Offer's been made, purchase hasn't been finalized. You're toured around this building. You're shown, the coffee maker, the golf simulator, the bedroom, the bathroom, etc. Is it reasonable to presume that people who were touring you asked what you thought of the place?
No, nobody, not even the people from the mission asked me what I thought. Of
So
the
you
place.
were going on a tour with these folks, and at no point did they say, "Well, it looks pretty nice, eh?" Or what do you think of this feature, Mr. Clark? It was kind of a silent walkabout. Is that sort of how it unfolded, or?
I was curious as to what it was that they had put an offer in, and I had a look.
Right. So
Nobody asked me.
you
what
had
I thought.
you had a look, but I mean, usually when someone has a look at something, there's a conversation that unfolds, right? So it would be unusual if you went on this tour of this new property, and you were not asked and offered no comment whatsoever on the nature of the place, its suitability or not, etc. But you would have this committee believe that in the course of this tour, there was no conversation about any of those things.
There was no conversation about whether I would approve or disapprove of what they were doing, because that wasn't in my realm of responsibility. I don't do.
No,
real
but
estate.
you took time out of your day. You've talked about all the work you're doing there.
Point of order.
Clearly, you're busy.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Got a point of order. Sorry, can't see who it is. Go ahead.
It's MP Chahal
Yeah,
here.
go ahead, Mr. Chahal.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My point of order, I've heard it from a number of speakers and previously from Ms. Kuzi and Mr. Brock, particularly prior to that. And now Mr. Jennis is also leaning into his mic, speaking quite loud and aggressively. And
Mr. Shaw, what is your point of order, please?
My point of order is for the health and safety of interpreters. If
Mr.
the speakers
Shahal,
don't
let me
mind
just say this
speaking
once,
so
because
loud.
I seem to have to say it every single time to new people on this committee. If there is an issue with the interpreters, they will contact the clerk. You do not need to interrupt the proceedings. Thank you very
Can I
much.
speak Mr. McCauley, if I could just finish. All I'm saying
No,
is...
that's not a point
I'm
of order. If there's
online.
an issue, Mr. Shahal, the interpreters will advise the clerk, but I do appreciate your concern
I would
for
just
them.
ask respectively if speakers could not speak so loudly or yell into the mics.
That's not a point of order.
If he
but
could not
thank
speak
you.
at all, we'd appreciate that.
Mr. Genuis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for showing Mr. Chahal how a committee chair is supposed to operate. Mr. Clark, back to you. You're describing this scenario that seems kind of fanciful to me, right? The purchase has not been complete yet. An offer's been made, but the purchase has not been complete. And you are brought to tour the property. Now, normally, when somebody is touring a property that they might live in the course of that tour, a conversation is going to happen about the suitability of the place. If you were staying miles away from this decision, it would have been natural for you to not go on the tour. Ostensibly, you had a reason for going on the tour, though. So when you went on this tour, before the property had been purchased, you were shown the glorious features and amenities of this property. You would have us believe that you said absolutely nothing about them, that nobody asked, does this seem like a suitable place? There was no back and forth whatsoever. You just looked at it, were silent, and then walked back to your office. That's what your testimony is?
That's what my testimony is. I was curious.
Okay. This is
That's
sort
why I
of
went.
you understand that the tour of silence on top of the email which says you were involved kind of suggest that members of this committee and of the public have a reason to be a bit skeptical about aspects of your testimony. I want to try to get one more question in. The government is purchasing a $9 million luxury condo for you to live in. We understand that a consul general would entertain guests in their residence, but obviously the whole residence is not for entertainment. You're not going to be inviting prospective investors into your bedroom, for example. Now, we have the floor plan of the new space. Would you accept that this luxury condo has a much smaller percentage of representational space, and the trade-off is much less representational space and much more luxurious personal space? Would you acknowledge that based on what you've seen in the tour?
No.
But sir, we have the floor plans. You're not entertaining people in every part of this space. the personal space is a much larger proportion, and it's much more luxurious than in the previous residence, which leans much more towards representational space. That's pretty clear in the floor plans, but you're denying that?
Yep.
Perfect. That is our time. Mr. Chahal, we'll go to you, sir, please, for 5 minutes. Sorry, Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, you're up, please, for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, now that you're allowing me to speak. Mr. Clark, thank you for providing testimony today. And then earlier on, Madame Vanolia just had mentioned or asked you a question regarding the usage of your space, and I think your time ran out. So I just wanted to provide you the opportunity as I begin my questioning, the role and the importance of your space, and if you wanted to add anything that you didn't get to add when you were asked that question earlier.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. And may I take this occasion to apologize to Madame Vinola for not being completely conversant in French enough to have given her the full answer in French. But allow me to go to some documents here, which will help sort of understand what we do in terms of the space. The 38 events that I've held, dinners, lunches, and breakfasts at the official residence and receptions as well, have always had one thing at its core, and that is it is a time to bring Canadians and Americans together. If I'm having a conference or a dinner, for example, on private equity and how that affects Canada, or venture capital and how that affects Canadian companies, I have down Canadian experts in that area, and we sit around a table with Americans. And that is a very effective way of bringing people together and advancing Canada's case here in New York City. We do, the receptions themselves tend to be rather small, as opposed to the larger ones that we would do here at the Mission, because we have the ability to have 80 or 100 people here at the Mission. But I think that, as everybody knows, official residences, whether they be political or whether they be diplomatic, are often used in a way to advance our cause. Advocacy is at the heart of everything that we do, and we use the tools that are available to us to do it, whether it be a residence or a mission.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, you mentioned that Governor Murphy was at one of the events you hosted, and I recently noticed that Governor Murphy just signed with the state of New Jersey and the province of Ontario a memorandum of understanding. And I think Premier Ford, the Conservative Premier of Ontario, talked about the importance of this relationship of creating economic collaboration and jobs. And I believe it's about close to maybe $10 billion between New Jersey and Ontario. So this is some of the work you do to make sure that where we have strong trading states with Canadian provinces, that we create those linkages. Could you reflect a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example. Governor Murphy, when I first met him, when I first arrived here, I met him within about a month of my arrival in post. And I went to New Jersey, had a conversation with him, and I started needling him at that point about why he hadn't done a trade and diplomatic mission to Canada. He had been to many other places. He is a very worldly guy, very connected politically in the United States. And I kept at him. And then as our relationship grew, as we saw more of each other, what the outcome was, then he said, all right, we're going to go to Canada, if nothing else, just to get you off my back. So that happened. But the New Jersey delegation that went up, there were a lot of academics. So we're talking about ties between Canadian universities, Canadian centers of excellence, and what's happening in New Jersey. Also, the film industry, as you know, trade these days is not, us selling a box of what we make to them and them selling us a box of what they make to us. Trade is what we make together. And going back to the integration of the economy, the New Jersey case is a perfect example of that. That inputs that we have into New Jersey products and vice versa, they need this. So I was delighted when the governor told me that there were memoranda of understanding, not only in Ontario, but also Quebec, where they had some terrific meetings. And we know, because we're doing a lot of follow-up on this, that there's a lot of follow-up coming out of that. So that's a real benefit to Canada.
So a part of your role, as you've stated, in hosting governors like Governor Murphy and others, is to help build connections for trade relations so we can expand trade. And I find it odd today that Conservative MPs that are attacking your role and the Consul General of New York for the real good work that your Consul General, your team has done in advancing Canadian trade relationships, economic collaboration, and jobs. And I saw Premier Ford stand up and say how great this partnership is going to be for Canada and for Ontario moving forward. But I also saw on BNN Governor Murphy talk about the importance of Canada and the U.S. Do you have anything? I don't have a lot of time left, but is there anything else you want to add that we haven't had regarding not just New Jersey and that specific relationship, but on some of the other states that have integral roles with our Canadian economy?
I would simply say that...
I'm sorry, Mr. Clark, I have to interrupt. We've gone about a minute past our time, but perhaps in the next intervention you can respond. We are now going to Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark, the residence on Park Avenue is a co-op. It's a condominium. It's said to be on Billionaires Row. So it's a condominium. So there should be an executive board, or does any member of your team sit on this board at the new residence? Madame Vignola, I have no idea. No idea. Right, thank you. With respect to this cooperative on Park Avenue, when will you be moving to this new residence? Well, when I'm told that it's time to move. So the receptions you are holding now are still on Park Avenue. That's right. Have you ever, or has any member of your team received emails from other members of the cooperative concerning holding receptions and if this might be disturbing to other residents? Never to me. I've never heard anything. But I'll have to say again, this does not fall within my responsibilities. Would it be possible to talk to your team to ask these questions? Yes. As far as I'm concerned, yes. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Have a lovely day.
Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark, if you'll humor me, I'd like to return to this question of the memo and your role or non-role in the process, and parse some of the words in the original memo and the amended memo. Now, by my reading, there are 3 steps in this process. This is sort of a 3-step ditty. You need to identify the need to find a new property. So there was the process of identifying the shortcomings with the existing property and the need to replace it. So that was the first step. The second step was to select a new property, which included, as we've heard as a committee, looking at a number of different properties in the neighborhood in New York. And then the third step was the approval of that selection and the decision to make the purchase. Does that seem like a fair characterization of the overall process?
As I understand it, yes.
So going back to the June 17th memo, it states that both the mission, including the head of mission and the property team in Ottawa, agreed on the need to identify a replacement property. Now, to me, that reads like step number one. It's identifying a need, and at the very start of the process. Now, the amendment on July 25th, rather, states neither head of mission was part of the selection or approval process for the overall process or the property purchase. Now, that strikes me as referring to steps 2 and 3 in that 3-step process. So, I'm concerned that the amendments seem to be parsing these words and referring to different parts of the process to avoid mistruths. And I'm not going to jump the shark like my conservative colleagues have and accuse you of lying. But is it not true that this amended version on July 25th could in fact be true, and that you could have also had a role in identifying the need for a new apartment?
Chair, that's a completely legitimate question, and perhaps I can clarify it. I agree with you that there are 3 steps to this, and the first step has to be the decision to move on, to sell the residence and look for something else. Let me make it abundantly clear, as I said in my opening statement, I had absolutely no role, no discussion, nothing to do with the decision to sell the old residence and move elsewhere. So that takes care of step number 1. I just wanted to give you that clarification.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Barrett, please go ahead.
So let's say a Canadian who didn't know Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went to buy a condo on their own, and let's break down those numbers. Say they have 20% down payment. Let's say they get a great mortgage rate, which is tough after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and the economic vandalism that he's perpetrated on Canadians. That'd work out to about $42,000 a month for your residence. How much do you pay in rent each month for your official residence? Just the number, please.
$1,800.
$1,800 on $42,000 a month. So it's fair to say that you're getting a massive subsidy worth tens of thousands of dollars for your rent every single month. Is that right?
No.
Okay, so what's the cost and what are you paying, Mr. Clark? Because the difference is being paid by someone. That someone is Canadian taxpayers. So it's being subsidized by the government of Canada. Is that correct?
No, it's not correct. I pay what the department asks me to pay. I have no role in negotiating that. That's in the that's in my
who pays
terms
who
of
pays
my
the
employment.
rest? Who pays the rest? It's your answer was $1,800. So Canadians are subsidizing you by the tune of $40,000, $40,200. I think it's unbelievable when you look at the context. 1 in 4 Canadians relying on food banks this fall to feed their families. Do you think that that is acceptable for Canadians, that they're subsidizing your rent during a housing and homelessness crisis in our country, that you're getting a more than $40,000 per month rent subsidy paid for by Canadian taxpayers?
I don't understand your numbers. We're returning more than $7 million to Canadian taxpayers. That's
And
the
you couldn't-
important number in here.
Sorry, you couldn't do that for less than $40,000 a month in rent? Is that your contention?
I don't know where this $40,000 comes from. Perhaps you could explain that to me.
Well, I did, sir, and I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. It was very straightforward. The terms that Canadians would have to enter into to live in the kind of place that they're furnishing you with, it would come at a price of more than $40,000, $42,000 a month, just for the cost of the residence, to say nothing of the taxes and utilities that they would have to pay. You're only paying $1,800 a month. Is there anywhere else on Billionaires Row that you can rent for $1,800 a month? Let's see if that makes it easier for you to understand the difference for Canadians. Is there anywhere else, any of your neighbors, are they able to pay $1,800 a month?
I have said from the beginning, I'm not in real estate. I don't go around asking people what they pay for rent. So I would not be very helpful to you in that regard.
I question your helpfulness on a range of things. Certainly, it's not present in these responses. Just quickly, UN Ambassador Bob Ray has an apartment in the same building as your old residence. Is Mr. Ray's apartment larger than your apartment?
I have no idea.
You, did the UN Ambassador previous to Mr. Ray occupy the unit that was assigned to you?
The unit that was assigned to me at 550 Park Avenue was occupied by the previous UN ambassador.
Do you know why they were switched?
When Ambassador Ray came here, both were available. Both are properties belonging to Global Affairs Canada.
Does his unit Does his unit need the major upgrades that would necessitate a move as well?
No.
Okay. Why is that? Was it brought up? It has full accessibility per Canadian standards. That's your understanding?
That's my understanding, but I'm no expert on the rules of accessibility. But my understanding is
okay.
that property was maintained and renovated and is up to code.
Interesting. So they made a $9 million offer on this luxury condo, and you visited it on May the appraisal was done on May the 9th, but you visited it on April 26th. Why were you visiting a condo that an offer had been made on but hadn't been appraised? How did the price get arrived at? I know you're not an expert in real estate, but wouldn't you get it appraised before you make an offer?
I will tell you what I said in my opening statement. I had nothing to do with this process, first, middle, or last.
Look, Mr. Clark, you're Justin Trudeau's $9 million man. Canadians don't know what extra value they're getting for this $9 million. And frankly, your answers today do nothing to assuage the concerns of Canadians who are struggling just to feed themselves.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Sabera, welcome to OGGO. You have 5 minutes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all my colleagues. I hope you and your respective families are doing well. Welcome, Consul General, to this to OGGO and to this committee here. Consul General, I at one time in my life lived in New York City for a period of about 7 years. To Ms. Vignola, I thank you for sharing your thoughts on the day of September 11th. I was there that day, and I'm a September 11th survivor, so it is etched in my memory 23 years later in my life and will always be a part of me. And I send my prayers are always and thoughts to those loved ones, those families that no longer have those loved ones with them, and those bright futures that are no longer here, whether they're from Cantor Fitzgerald or from other firms that occupied the floors of the thing. Mr. Consul General, I kind of want to start my comments. So I sort of want to apologize in a way, in the sense that I think the word liar has been used today by some of my honorable colleagues. And I've sat on committees for the last 9 years, and I've been in Parliament. And when I hear that type of language, when we invite witnesses of whoever they may be, from business, academia, nonprofit, or consul generals like yourself, I always become dismayed when parliamentarians use that type of language. So on my behalf, personally, I think it's undignified, unnecessary, and does not add to anything parliamentary decorum. As a member of the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, and with a riding that is very much occupied with trade and investment with the United States, there is no stronger relationship than with the United States of America. $3 billion a day of trade goes back, and trade and services go back and forth our borders. New York State has an economy larger than most countries in the world, and would be probably in the G20, the G10, if I'm not mistaken. And we need to obviously leverage that relationship. The sale of the initial apartment is obviously going to bring in more proceeds than the purchase of the other apartment. And I know it's basic math. It may not go across to some of my colleagues, but when you sell something for more than you buy something else, there's actually what's called a surplus and net proceeds coming into the government. So I applaud the government for doing that. And one of the things I do want to say to you, Consul General, when I ask is just how important is the nexus of New York City in terms of the finance, in terms of the business, in terms of the commerce for the Canadian economy, those relationships that exist for the standard of living, for jobs, for a two-way trade that goes back and forth between the United States and Canada. If you can just touch on that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. I will do it as efficiently as I can. I just want to take one quick moment to thank Madame Vignola for her comments on September 11th. I, too, was in New York that evening of September 11th, not in the morning, but I was here in the evening. Yesterday, I attended a service of remembrance along with members of the Toronto Police Service and the Barrie Police Service from Ontario, as well as our military attaché. It is part of the soul of New York, remembering September 11th. In terms of the importance to Canada, it cannot be overstated. New York City itself is the economic hub, not only of the United States, but in many ways the economic hub of the world. Decisions that are taken here, directions that are taken here, and opinions that are created here drive policy and drive wealth or poverty around the world. Where the opportunities are created are here in New York City. It is our job, therefore, to make sure that we seize the opportunities, create those opportunities, and accelerate those opportunities for Canada. Because as I said earlier, the whole purpose of somebody like myself and this magnificent trade and investment division we have here at the consulate is to create wealth and jobs for Canadians. That's it. That is the bottom line. And it happens here. It's not to say that there aren't other areas that are equally that are important as well. They are, but in many ways, all the money in the world's in New York City.
Unmute there. Council General, we do know within Parliament we have a wide range of views of our parliamentary colleagues. In fact, on the official opposition, we have members there who are actually for Brexit. They're not free traders. They don't believe in, a Canada-U.S. free trade agreement. They don't believe in free trade agreements with Europe. And we are seeing some of those views come out in the last little while. And it's unfortunate because we know the Canadian economy is an open economy. We know we prosper when we trade and we create linkages. And the attacks that we're seeing today on yourself, on our officials in terms of moving our relationship forward. You mentioned the countries in Europe that have expanded their footprint in the United States. And look, we as a country sold our presence in London for some money, where it was $100 or $200 million at the time. If you go back to London, UK today, that decision by the Harper government, that building's probably worth $1 billion, $1.5 billion in today's dollars. So much like the Conservatives have done here in the past in the province of Ontario with Highway 407, we see the same thing taking place with the Conservatives federally. They like to sell some Crown assets and take some money. I need you to wrap up, Mr.
Sabera. You're past your time.
And then, oh, thank you, Chair. And then claim that they're good fiscal stewards, which is completely false. Good to see everyone today, Chair. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing everyone on Monday back at Ottawa. Consul General, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Mr. Sabera. Mr. Brock, please go ahead for 5. And colleagues, just we've only got a couple more interventions, but ask everyone please watch the clocks.
Mr. Clark, I've listened very carefully to your testimony over the last approximately hour and a half. You've stated on numerous occasions repeatedly that you simply had no involvement in the real estate process. But sorry, Mr. Clark, again, I've got proof. I've got more emails. I'm referring now to an email that was sent to both you and your spouse on July the 17th, 2024, requesting permission to visit your official residence with the contracted appraiser. Please advise if time works with you. Your wife responded the same date and said, yes, thanks. And then I also received a previous email indicating that the appraisers had been to your property the previous year, so either the spring or early summer of 2023 when the events unfolded as we have asked you. So they visited your property on 2 occasions. You were part of that process. Your spouse was part of that process, which really puts a different spin on your stated position numerous times that you simply had no involvement. Now, I want to go back to the 26th of April, 2024, when you visited the penthouse, or the condominium, I should say, my apologies, on Billionaires Row. Who showed you the property?
Who showed me the property? It was the real estate agent, a couple of real estate agents, and I went with a couple of people from the mission.
Okay. And I'm sure that in your lifetime, Mr. Clark, you and your spouse have purchased property, personal property?
We have,
Right?
Mr. Chair.
No, sir, that's,
I am
sir, this
prepared-
is my
I am
time.
prepared to
Sir,
talk about this, but do not bring my wife into this.
sir, this is my time. I'm asking you the questions. Thank you. I'm really merely
Point
referring
of
to an
order,
email.
Chair. Point of order. Point of order.
Sorry, Mr. Brock, we have a point of order. Go ahead.
You know, whether this is a point of order or not, let's have some decorum. The Consul General here has nothing to do with his family, nothing at all. It's very bad. Come on, let's get better. We're better than that, guys.
Thanks. Continue, Mr. Brock.
Vera should review the material that his party has received because clearly Mr. Clark's wife is referenced and she in fact identifies herself by her first name. I'm not making this up. It's in the documents, Mr. Cervera. So going again, Mr. Clark, you've purchased property in the past probably numerous times with the assistance of real estate agents. They do their best to sell property to you, to highlight all the features of the property to you. Are you suggesting to Canadians that when you toured this Billionaires Row condominium that's right in front of Central Park, that they were completely muted and you simply walked around aimlessly looking at all the features, not asking any questions, and them not highlighting certain features to you? Is that what you want Canadians to believe? Yes or no, Mr. Clark?
Oh, yes.
Wow. Wow. You have found the most inept real estate agent in the entire world. That is fascinating, Mr. Clark. Let me ask you this, Mr. Clark. Are you a golfer? Are you a
Depends
golfer,
who
sir?
you ask.
Are you a golfer?
Depends who you ask. Depends who you ask.
Okay. Are you a swimmer?
Depends who you ask.
And do you play pickleball?
No. I
Oh.
don't even know what it is.
Well, you've got two 25-meter lane swimming lanes in your new condominium. You've got a golf simulator. That's every man's dream to have that. That's right in your building, as well as you have paddle courts. Now, was it a requirement, sir, to you in your role as the Consul General for New York to have the world's most expensive appliances?
Order, Mr. Chair.
For instance, the stove alone
Mr.
is
Brock.
some
Mr. Brock, sorry. Go ahead on the point of order, please.
I just think Mr. Brock said it's every man's dream to have a golf simulator, and I just want to clarify on the record that it is not my dream,
Okay.
and I'd prefer if you didn't
Colleagues, could we
misrepresent
not descend
people's.
to this? Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
So, Mr. Clark, is it a requirement of your position to have a $19,000 oven, a $13,000 refrigerator, a $4,600 coffee maker, an $11,000 freezer? Is that a requirement of your position, sir, or did you ask for that?
Nope.
Enjoy it.
Thanks, Mr. Brock. We will now go to Mr. Jouari. Go ahead, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Thank you for keeping your composure. Thank you. I noticed at times you went red and you took your glasses off and you kind of, shook your head. And I just wanted to also apologize on behalf of our side. We respect the work that you're doing. We respect the person who you are. And we thank you for coming here and for answering the questions. The name calling is not something that we support, and the point of view of the colleague across the aisle is not something that we share. Having said that, in your comments, you talked about the fact that we should not look at trade with Canada only or trade with U.S., and we should look at trade with the North American bloc. I think that's a core of what it is that we need to do. Especially you highlighted the fact that after COVID-19, after the restriction around supply chain, after the war in Ukraine, after the instability that exists in Middle East around some of the energy sources, the more that we are aligned with our neighbors, and the more we think as an integrated bloc, with ability to be able to respond within hours, as you said, is the core of this. Can you, and I'm going to bring another lens to it, which I think it really puts into perspective. We are all Canadians, as you said, and as Americans, you said, they're all dealing with affordability and cost of living. How ensuring that this tight relationship not only continues to exist, but is focused around energies such as, zero carbon economy, as well as key critical minerals, will ensure that that trading block becomes one, and it helps with the affordability and it helps with the stability that we really need in this part of the world that I can say it doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree with you. Let me take you to a couple of issues where I've had extensive discussions with governors and senators and congressmen on this point in the area of my responsibility. There's the one thing that is top of mind for governors in my area is energy. Not only keeping up with what they've got now, but will they have enough energy to be part of the new economy that's coming? When we talk about the integrated relationship of the economy between Canada and the United States, this is where it really comes into play. Take a look at, for example, semiconductors. This is a key part of the new economy. We have a semiconductor corridor between Albany, New York, and Bromont, Quebec, that is second to none in the world. We have equipment that is second to none in the world. We do packaging and research in Bromont, Quebec. That is vital to what the chip economy is going to be demanding. So we're already integrated into that, and that is an industry that is hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars large. If we missed out on an opportunity to be part of that, then it would be a disaster for our country. I can happily say that we are fully engaged in that, fully engaged in being part of that supply chain, and fully engaged in creating opportunities, not only for Canadian workers, but for Canadian academics and inventors and people who are going to be necessary to what we want to do. You know, I often say that there are four elements of the new economy. It is land, it is water, it is talent, and it is energy. Those are the four things that you need to be part of the new economy. Canada has all of them. Canada has the most educated workforce in the world. We have land, we have water, and we've got energy. And we've got to keep our eye on the ball, and we've got to understand how we can be part of a North American solution to what is a growing challenge for the entire world. We're really well positioned. We've got the right people. We've got the right industries. All we have to do is seize the opportunities and let everybody know, especially the Americans know, that we literally are your very best friends. And as one person said, Americans are our best friends, whether we like it or not. That was said in the 60s. And, it's humorous, but it is true. There is no closer relationship in the world other than Canada and the United States.
Thank you for helping us seize that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5. Mrs. Vignola, you're up for 2.5.
Ah, merci. La traduction s'est pas rendue. Je suis vraiment désolée.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, I'm going to refer to the past, but in 2006, in another country, I believe it was Peru, there was a building built. If we'd had to build something in New York, could we have had anything built for $9 million? In my opinion, no. Building something in New York City is just about impossible, but $9 million, it would not be enough. I also know that there are townhouses in New York. some things that might be more affordable, do you think, in your opinion, for an official residence? Well, there are issues of security. I'm not going to discuss these things in public, but what we're doing is necessary. Global Affairs has asked for something with 3 rooms, at least 3 rooms. Why not 1 or 2? Please go ahead. Excellent question. Here in New York, for all Canadians who work here at our mission in New York, the model we work with is that for families, it's always 3 bedrooms. That's necessary. And for families with children, sometimes it's more. It might be 4 rooms, 4 bedrooms. So it's difficult to find something in New York where there's 1 or 2 bedrooms, as well as rooms that are big enough to do your business. So what would you need, for example, if you were talking about Montreal? I have no idea. Global Affairs has its own rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clark, you've asserted several times in this meeting that you had no role in either the sale of the old property or the purchase of the new one. I'm a little bit confused by, the fact that you toured the new apartment after the offer had been made, before the deal had closed. Was that the first time that you became aware of the sale and purchase process by Global Affairs?
As head of mission, I was aware that there was a process underway, but I was not part of that process. Nobody came in and talked to me about what they were looking at or the type of money they were talking about. The only thing I ever knew at the, when I got toured, I'm curious, I wanted to see what it was that they were looking at, having made the offer to it. But
fair enough. What I was trying to get at was whether you were apprised that there was a process taking place, and you've answered that yes, you were aware that there was a process. So when the appraiser showed up at the old residence and your wife gave them access, it wasn't a surprise to her. It wasn't a surprise to you to find out that this had happened. When were you first apprised of Global Affairs' intention to sell the old property and purchase a new property?
It would have been, and allow me to look at my notes, it would have been April 12th when they had put that conditional offer on. I want to make it very clear, and you're quite right. As head of mission, I was aware that there was a process going on. I was not part of that process, but I knew it was going on. I had no idea of timing or what they were looking at or anything. The only thing I knew about the process at the end was that this was going to return $7 million or more to Canadian taxpayers, which is why I thought it was a good idea.
So you were first apprised of this process April 12th, which coincided with the date the offer was made on the new property?
Yeah, I believe so, but it was simply that at that point, somebody, I believe, had told me that they had put an offer in on this particular property.
Okay, and that notification was made to you verbally. There's no documentation in which Global Affairs reaches out to you and says, by the way, we've put an offer on this property?
No.
Thanks very much. We have
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Backrack. We now have Mr. Genuis and then Mr. Baines. Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Mr. Clark, your story, which we don't believe, but your story is that you were not involved in the purchase. But once you saw the place, the amenities, the luxuries, you did tour it after all, why didn't you say no? Why didn't you report back and say this is way too much at a time when Canadians are struggling? You could have at that point said something to someone about this decision, and you didn't. Why did you choose not to, sir?
When they told me that we were giving $7 million back to Canadian taxpayers, I thought that was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, but that's comparing apples to oranges, and we've talked about how absurd those numbers are before. Did they tell you those were the numbers at the time, sir?
Yeah.
They told you in
listen,
April.
It could be, it
okay.
could be more than $7 million. It
well,
could be $8 million.
That's that's quite something since the property wasn't listed for months and months afterwards. But your testimony today is that you were told at the time in April the magnitude of their estimated alleged savings. So we'll probably want to follow up on that claim you've just made. Sir, I have a few more questions about your background. Minister Jolie has appointed you twice, at least. The first time was when she was Heritage Minister, and then she appointed you again when she was Foreign Affairs Minister. She first appointed you to chair an advisory committee to recommend appointments while she was Minister of Heritage, appointments that included the CBC. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. What was the period over which you held that position?
I think it was about 4 months.
Okay. Did you recommend the appointment of Catherine Tate?
I recommended 2 candidates, and the government chose.
Okay, she was one of them?
Yep.
Okay. You were recommending candidates for the board of CBC as well. Did you recommend the appointment of Mr. Harley Finkelstein?
Yes.
Okay. Were any of your children employed by Mr. Finkelstein's company at the time when you recommended the appointment?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that seem like a problem to you?
Mr. Finkelstein is one of Canada's greatest entrepreneurs.
He might be a great guy, sir. I've never met him, but the point is, your members of your immediate family were employed by him, and you used a position in government to recommend him for a position at the same time as members of your family were on the board, and you didn't recuse yourself from that discussion.
Our family was not on the board of Shopify.
No, but they were employees of his company.
Employees, yes.
Yes, okay.
But not on the board, as you
right,
stated.
right. You recommended him to the board while members of your family were his employees. That's on the record, and people can now make their judgments. Sir, you were a journalist until 2017. Is that correct?
I didn't recommend him to the board. Which board are you talking about?
Okay, I think we're past this now, and I have limited time. You testified that you recommended him to be on the board of CBC. Now, you were a journalist until 2017. Is that correct?
Point of order, Chair. Can I have point of order?
It was on a list of names.
Point of order.
Excuse me, point of order. Go ahead, please, on the point of order.
I want to ask about relevance. Relevance in terms of where Mr. Jennis is going with this has nothing to do with anything with regards to the residents in New York City. This is asking the Consul General about past matters in his life and in past roles. This has absolutely nothing to do with the topic at hand here at this committee. And I know Mr. Jennis likes to go down these paths and become like some sort of spy detective, but let's get serious here. There's no relevance here, Garnett.
Okay, Mr. Saber, we always allow
Can I just comment on this point of order, Chair?
I think we'd like to just get to our time. Mr. Sabera, it's not a point of order, but go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Well, just on the point of order, I think there are a lot of questions today about Mr. Clark's credibility and his close connections with the government. The fact that Minister Jolie appointed him twice and that he was able to recommend people with whom he had close connections when he was in one of those positions. And now he's in this new appointed position. He's living in this. He's receiving the benefits associated with this $9 million residence. I think these things are very much relevant to the questions of credibility that are involved. But I have a minute and a half left. Is that right? 1 minute. Sorry, I'm commenting on the point of order though. This wasn't part of my time, or.
Yes, it was.
Cutting into my time.
Okay, Chair. I don't think that was clear. Very quickly, you were a journalist until 2017. During the 2011 election campaign, a member of your family had a senior position within the Liberal National Campaign. Did you disclose that at the time?
Disclose to whom?
To the public.
It was not relevant.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'd like to now move a motion. The motion is that Minister Jolie be asked to appear before the committee before the Thanksgiving break to answer questions about actions, policies, and plans related to GAC's real property portfolio in other countries and any other issues related to the committee's mandate, and further that the committee invite Emily Nicholson to appear. Having gotten that motion moved in the time, I'll now speak to it.
Thanks. Let me interrupt briefly. Have you sent that copy to the clerk?
Yes, the clerk has it, I believe, in both
distribute it out.
both official languages.
Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to put a cap on the discussion we've had so far that leads into why I think this motion is important. Mr. Clark has talked about the benefits of public service, and I would in principle agree about the importance of public service. But if you look at the facts here, Mr. Clark has been appointed twice to important positions by Minister Jolie. In the first case, he was in a position to recommend for an appointment someone whose companies employed at least one member of his family. And in another case, he was able to have the benefits of this purchase of a $9 million condo on Billionaire Row. When he was a national journalist, a member of his immediate family was simultaneously in a senior important member of the Liberal campaign. He's professed his nonpartisanship, but we do see that a member of his immediate family had a senior role in the Liberal campaign in 2011, and that would seem to at least be something that would have been of interest to the public. So these are things, benefits, opportunities that are not normally associated with public service. Mr. Chair, we have identified the fact that not once but twice Mr. Clark received appointments from Minister Jolie in different portfolios, and the government has made various claims about the purchase of this property that are highly suspect, about who was involved, who wasn't involved. And the buck has to stop somewhere. We think the buck has to stop with the minister, which is why we are proposing that Minister Jolie appear before the committee to answer questions about this issue. Moreover, Chair, I want to point out that Minister Jolie is, of course, a prominent member of the government. And I'm sorry, I think Mr. Hardy was maybe trying to do a point of order. It probably isn't one, but I'm not sure if you... No, he's...
Continue.
He thought better of it? Okay, I'll continue, Chair.
No, I haven't. No, it is a point of order. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, we could not hear you, Mr. Hardy. Go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to check on timing here. I don't know how long this committee meeting is supposed to go. I was asked to appear for 2 hours. The 2 hours is up.
Sorry to interrupt your holiday, Ken. This isn't a point of order.
Gentlemen and
ladies. No.
Lady,
but
sorry.
If we've gone beyond our time,
continue, Mr. Hardy.
Unanimous. Do we not need unanimous agreement to go past the stated time of adjournment?
No.
Okay.
Continue, Mr. Generous.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I was in the process of pointing this much out. Minister Jolie is a prominent member of the government, and her name has come up on a number of occasions at this committee before. Right now, we're looking at these questions of property investments, the $9 million purchase on Billionaires Row in New York. Fairly recently, this committee was investigating the fact that an internal audit at Global Affairs revealed that 1/4 of contracts broke the rules. Imagine that, 1/4 of contracts at Minister Jolie's department broke the rules. And having served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, having been the vice chair of that committee for some time before joining OGGO, I can share with members here that Minister Jolie is not one of those ministers who makes herself available to parliamentary committees very often. At Foreign Affairs Committee, it was a major struggle to get her to appear on things, and we went long periods of time without hearing from ministers. Some ministers, ostensibly lower profile ministers in the government, would appear fairly often to respond to studies, to address the estimates, as is the normal practice of committee. But Minister Jolie has done everything she can to avoid answering questions from parliamentarians at committees and to limit the length of those appearances. And I suspect we'll see, as a result of whatever assessments of the impact of her appearing before committee, we'll see members of the government, again, reluctant to allow the invitation to be extended to Minister Jolie to appear before OGGO. But, I think a senior member of the government, somebody floated as a prospective future leadership candidate, but in any event, as a senior member of the government with an important portfolio, she should be ready, willing, and able to answer questions from committees from time to time, both at Foreign Affairs and at the Government Operations Committee. So we have these issues about the property portfolio. We had previously tried to get Minister Jolie to appear on this internal audit revealing 1/4 of contracts breaking rules at her department. And so there are a number of issues relevant to this committee's mandate where I think we would benefit from being able to ask Minister Jolie questions. And somebody who is operating at that senior level should be prepared to take questions from parliamentarians. We should extend the invitation, and I hope that she will respond to that invitation. Very briefly, I'll just add, Chair, that we did put into this motion Ms. Nicholson, who was involved in the infamous email that suggests Mr. Clark's potential role in the purchase. This clearly is a matter of dispute. He gave testimony about not being involved. I think it would be worthwhile to have Ms. Nicholson come before the committee and be able to address what Mr. Clark has said and to help the committee shed some light on this important question. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I have a speaking order of Mr. Jouari.
Mr. Chair, can I make a point of order?
Oh, yeah. Give me 2 seconds. I have
Thank
Mr. Jouari, then Mr. Barrett, then I have Mr. Backrack. And then before we get to Mr. Jouari and the point of order, I'm going to release Mr. Clark, unless anyone has an issue with that. Mr. Clark, thank you for joining OGGO today. We appreciate your time, and we'll let you go.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, Mr. Backrack, on your point of order, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this point of order just relates to the admissibility of the motion. So the committee has considered a motion and carried it unanimously to invite Emily Nicholson to appear. And my question through you to the clerk is whether, if the current motion is defeated, whether that would reverse the committee's earlier decision and whether we can essentially reconsider a decision that's been made earlier in this same meeting.
Sorry, Chair, just on a point of order, Mr. Backrack's point is well taken. I think it would be maybe more appropriate to deem the last few words not part of the motion anymore in light of the decision the committee has already made. Now, if the committee were to support this, it would simply reaffirm a decision we've already been made. So I don't actually think it's inadmissible, and I don't think it's a big deal. But it also doesn't need to be in there.
Thanks, Mr. Backrack, for bringing that up. It is a very good point. We can proceed with either just an agreement among ourselves, just delete that part, because the committee has agreed to have Ms. Nicholson appear. Yes. Barring that, we can just do it through an amendment, but I hope we can just agree. Delete that final part regarding Ms. Nicholson. Thanks. We have Mr. Thank you again for bringing that up. I have Mr. Jouari, then Mr. Barrett. Go ahead, Mr. Jouari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now we have a motion to request the minister to come. And if I recall where we are now, let me start by what we agreed on. We agreed on to look at all the documents, hear from all the witnesses that we wanted to hear, that we thought they were directly involved. We've heard from the department, we've heard from a number of witnesses, and now we heard from Mr. Clark, and it's quite clear that neither Mr. Clark nor I believe from what we've heard and from the documents we reviewed, Minister had any involvement in the acquisition of the new property, as well as the disposition of the existing property. So based on the motion that we unanimously passed, that we will look at all the documents and make a decision, given the fact that now we know the decision to purchase was not influenced by any political interference, and the business case for it is quite clear, and the process was followed. There was no interference, and it makes economic sense, and there is value for the money. I fail to understand that why we are asking a minister to show up now. If our colleagues have issue with minister not appearing in other committees, that should be dealt with that committee. If it's in Foreign Affairs, probably the Foreign Affairs Committee should deal with that. And also, if there's a study that we had asked for the minister to show, such as the procurement, and the minister hasn't shown, has decided not to show because it just shows that it's irrelevant to the minister's involvement. And this is yet another case that we have that it's irrelevant to the role that the minister played. So given the fact that, and I summarize, given the fact of relevance, not Foreign Affairs, not relevant to this committee, procurement, not relevant to this study, our understanding and agreement for the scope of this study was we'll look at all the evidence, we'll make a decision whether we want Mr. Clark to come or the minister come. We agreed that we want Mr. Clark to come. Mr. Clark came, it was quite clear he doesn't have anything to do with it. And all indications are the minister hasn't had anything to do with it as well. If you're trying to go after a witch hunt and trying to go back and say how did the appointment went and all of those things, that's not what I'm interested. If that's the path that we're going on, I'll be voting against. And I don't see any reason whatsoever we should have the minister come as it relates to the acquisition and disposition of this property. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jari. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, Chair. I'll speak to some of the concerns raised by Liberal members. They're saying that the minister hasn't had anything to do with it. Well, it was the testimony of officials that the minister's chief of staff, in fact, was part of the decision tree, part of the conversation. We've heard over and over again from Liberals that they don't send political exempt staff to committee and they send the minister instead. So if Liberal members are suggesting that the minister's chief come to appear in her place and then the committee then make a decision on whether or not the minister should come after hearing from her chief, I guess we can have that conversation, but I'm doubtful that that's the case. The minister is responsible for what happens in her department, or she ought to be. Mr. Sorbera took issue with Mr. Genes's asking questions about Mr. Clark's record as a government appointee. I mean, the lack of curiosity, or more like a willful blindness by folks, I'll say opportunists like Mr. Sorbera, doesn't do Canadians any justice.
Point of order, Chair. We're not here to degrade or go at our members
Sorbera,
about their
point of order.
MP Barrett, we're all representatives for our constituents. You don't need to use that type of language to degrade other MPs. Whether it's a point of order or not, you don't need to go down that path, Michael. Come on. You're better than that, I would hope.
Thank you, Mr. Sorbera.
Please.
Mr. Barrett.
Seriously.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Sorbera. Mr. Barrett, go ahead, please.
Well, if we're invoking first names, Francesco, your lack of curiosity or willful blindness does absolutely nothing to serve the Canadian people. And, your interruption of Mr. Jennis because you were simply upset that he was asking tough questions about someone who had been appointed by your government, sir, a corrupt government, and that appointee, Mr. Clark, did recommend the head of the company that his children worked for an appointment. That's a blatant conflict of interest. It's very relevant when we have Mr. Clark saying things here. You know, Mr. Johari had said that, Mr. Clark said that he didn't have anything to do with it, and therefore we have to take his word for it. We have officials from your government who in writing said that, in fact, Mr. Clark was part of it. So who's lying? The government officials or the government appointees, or both? And the integrity of the appointments that your government is making, that Minister Jolie is making, she appointed someone who was saying that they were an impartial broadcaster. Meanwhile, during an election, federal elections, one of their children held a senior role with a political party in Canada, with the Liberal Party in Canada. Credibility, integrity, conflicts of interest. Now, these things are very foreign concepts, staying clear of conflicts of interest. We've seen Justin Trudeau twice found guilty of breaking ethics laws. A cabinet of serial ethical lawbreakers. We're going to keep asking tough questions, even if you say our first names and ask us and beg us not to. This isn't about who you know, which unfortunately is how Mr. Clark got that appointment and that $40,000 a month rent subsidy while Canadians are literally freezing in the dark and starving. So the minister is responsible for taking the decision. If she chose to delegate authority, she's ultimately responsible for that. But her chief of staff, we heard from the department officials. The chief of staff was involved in the conversations. So is the proposal to have the chief come? I don't think it is. But we're past that. We want to hear from the minister. And again, to Mr. Jennis's point, if history has been any indicator, we're going to get a full court press from the Liberals to protect the minister from having to be accountable to Canadians. That is certainly not the responsibility of members to protect ministers. So let's get the minister to come to committee, answer questions about this. It's an unacceptable purchase. Mr. Clark's answers today were not credible. And I think some of what we heard about his failure to recuse himself from decisions that he ought to have recused himself from in the past tell quite a tale. And the Liberals' strong protest of the examination of those facts is very, very telling. It's important that the minister comes to testify.
Thanks. I have Mr. Brock, then Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair. And I just I want to take the time, because I know media is watching and following this, as they have throughout. I want to make a following statement to the media. I want to spell out the timeline of events here and why Minister Jolie needs to testify at this committee. Tom Clark is appointed in February 2023. He then hosts the Prime Minister at the Old Condo on April 27, 2023. And he and Trudeau were driving around New York the next day, April the 28th. Global Affairs Canada said that new problems were identified with the residents in the spring and summer of 2023, right after Trudeau visits, and then steps were taken to buy Clark the $9 million condo on Billionaires Row. On the documents that we received that identified Tom Clark being instrumental in giving a green light in buying the $9 million condo, that particular email chain was from the minister's own department. It was sent on June the 17th of 2024. On July 12th of that same year, the story breaks regarding the purchase of the $9 million condo. The bogus correction saying Tom Clark was not involved on June the 25th, was dated June the 25th, the very next day after this committee ordered the documents on Clark's involvement in buying the New York condo. This is precisely why the minister needs to testify. We have, on the one hand, documents that suggest very direct involvement in the purchase of the condominium, and then we have Mr. Clark's own version today, which is highly suspect. In fact, I would say it is extremely highly suspicious. And this is precisely why Minister Jolie has many questions to answer, and her attendance is crucial. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair, and I hope we'll get support for this motion. I just want to conclude by just responding to Mr. Jahari very specifically here, that we have put forward motions before to have ministers come, and we have not seen anywhere near the level of reluctance about inviting those ministers to appear. Notionally, a minister doesn't have to appear if they're invited, although we hope they would respond positively to that invitation. I think there are important questions to ask about this issue, as well as a number of other issues relating to the committee's mandate. And when other ministers have been mentioned as potentially people we want to have testify, there's been a much greater willingness to allow that testimony to occur. But somehow, for some reason, with Minister Jolie, immediately the government members are jumping in to try to prevent this committee from issuing that invitation. And it's striking because we've got a person who is so prominent in the government, who is such a core part of the Trudeau government's decision-making process, and yet someone who Liberal MPs don't want to see in a position where they have to answer questions from the opposition. I think somebody who has a senior role in government, who is planning to contend for the most senior role in government, they should be prepared to answer questions from MPs about the things that happen at their department. And I think if you look at the record, the selective approach that Liberals take, for other ministers, sure, they can testify. But for Minister Jolie, every time this has come up on different issues at OGGO and elsewhere, government members are eager to prevent her from being invited to testify in particular. And she has very rarely testified before parliamentary committees. She's never testified before this committee. Let's give her the chance. If the government has a good story to tell here, if they do, then let the minister tell that story. I think it's fair to the minister and it's fair to Canadians to issue that invitation for her to be able to respond to. Thank you.
Thanks. Seeing no one else, we will go to a vote on the motion. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Sorbara.
Mr. Sorbara has been replaced by Madam Salma Zahid.
Vote no. I'm voting no. I'm here. Voting
Sorry.
no. Voting no.
Mr. Baines.
That's Salma.
Mr. Baines, I did not hear you. No. Mr. Johari.
On invitation of the minister, no.
Mr. Shahal.
No.
Mr. Hardy.
No.
Mr. Brock.
Yes.
Mr. Jennings.
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Madame Vignola. Oui. And Mr. Backrack.
In favor.
Five against five.
I'll vote in favor of the motion.
Chair.
Colleagues, the motion carries. It was before to have the meeting before Thanksgiving break, so if you leave it with the clerk and I, we will figure out a date. Do you have something else, Mr. Genovese, before we break?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got another motion to move, and the clerk has this one as well. The motion is as follows: that the committee report to the House its view that the government should not have purchased a $9 million luxury condo on Billionaires Row in New York, especially in light of the fact that they have not secured a buyer for the previous residents. Further, that the committee call on the government to begin the process of looking for more economical and less opulent alternatives for the Consul General. I think that's a fairly straightforward motion which expresses our conclusions as Conservatives about the government's decision to purchase this $9 million luxury condo. And my hope is that a majority of the committee will agree with this motion, and this committee will take that position as well. So I don't think it requires more explanation. In a way, I think the explanation has been the meetings that have taken place, but I'll read the motion one more time. I know it's going to be distributed, but I want to make sure members have it. That the committee report to the House its view that the government should not have purchased a $9 million luxury condo on Billionaires Row in New York, especially in light of the fact that they have not secured a buyer for the previous residents. Further, that the committee call on the government to begin the process of looking for more economical and less opulent alternatives for the Consul General, period. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'll start a speaking list. I see Mrs. Vignola first. Go ahead, Mrs. Vignola.
Le fait de faire un rapport avant.
Reporting on this before having dealt with the entire question seems to me to be perhaps not correct. I think we should look at everything. We should be able to reread the testimony we've had and perhaps hear from people who specialize in real estate in New York before coming forward with a report. I think that would be premature and perhaps irresponsible. And this, I'm not even dealing with questions of whether it's right or wrong, but I think we need more information before we table a report.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So naturally, we oppose this, and I'm somewhat surprised. We just went through about 15-20 minutes to have a conversation around why we should invite the minister, yet the decision was already made by our Conservative colleagues to be able to move another motion that we should halt the process because they've come to the conclusion. That leads me to believe that the invitation to the minister was only a matter of a political purpose than anything else, rather than a fact finding. So a process. So I'm surprised I cannot, and I don't believe my colleagues on our side will also be able to support the process that has been clearly demonstrated that it followed all the rules, and it is supported with a net positive future cash flow, as well as a saving of $7.5 million, and potentially also making $12 million on a $9 million investment. So I'm very much opposed to that, and I don't understand why we are jumping into a conclusion and recommending to the House of a decision that until 2 minutes ago we needed to have the minister to come in to get to. So I'm surprised, but not really. So having said that, our side will be voting no against that motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Jari. We have Mr. Genovese.
Just very briefly, there is no contradiction whatsoever between saying that the minister should answer questions about this important matter related to her portfolio, and also saying that we have enough information now to come to the conclusion that this purchase should not have been made. Now, we're going to have a vote, and a majority of the committee will have its way, and if our view isn't reflective of the majority view, then so be it. But our view is that the minister should appear to give an account for what has happened, and also that we have enough information at this point to come to the conclusion that the purchase of this $9 million condo on Billionaires Row, as the motion says, especially when the original property hasn't been sold. I mean, we have this sort of phantom math being created that if the first property sells at asking price versus the actual price of the new property, well, right now we just own 2 Consul General's residences, and we have and we're paying the carrying costs of both for as long as we hold them both. So I think there's no contradiction there. And look, this committee will vote, and the public will draw their conclusions based on whether people vote in favor of or against our motion, saying that this purchase was not an appropriate decision.
Thanks, Mr. Jouari.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the
Sorry,
implication. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what the implication of reneging on a commitment that has been made. Is there a penalty involved, and how much the penalty is, etc. But I think this is way premature to be able to make a decision or recommendation like that. So our position has not changed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mrs. Vignola.
Je trouve
I find it extraordinary that we want to table a report before our study has been completed. We're sort of being threatened as committee members, and I am sorry, but I don't know what's going to happen through social media because we part of one party, a member of one party or another. Let's be adults and look at things in their entirety. I will not give in to threats, whether it's no matter how subtle the threat is. My intention is to do things in their entirety, to have a complete study and analysis, as any responsible person would do, because we're dealing with taxpayers' money and because our role is to study the process. And legally speaking, I don't know if it's the same in New York as here, but when a sale is canceled, there are problems. There are monies involved that have to be paid, and I would imagine that's how it is here, and I imagine it would be the same thing in New York. So if we're to come up with a report, we would have to first study this issue in its entirety, evaluate the consequences of any decision we might take, as any responsible person would do who is dealing with public monies. And I will not change my view, no matter what anyone says of me on social media.
See no one else on the speakers list, so we will go to a vote. Sir?
Mr. Dhaliwal?
You're muted, Mr. Dhaliwal.
No.
Ms. Zayed?
No.
Mr. Jouari?
Oppose.
Mr. Shahal?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Mr. Jenis?
Yes.
Ms. Kuzi?
In favor.
Madame Vignola?
non.
Mr. Backrack?
No.
Okay, so yeas pour, 3, 3, and nays contre, 5, no, 7.
Thanks. Motion is defeated. Now, before we adjourn, colleagues, just very quickly, I'm sure you're all aware that our meetings are now switched to Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. for 2 hours. Thursday, September 19th, we are continuing from a motion passed June 12th with McKinsey. Tuesday, we had planned to do the Canada Post review. There's a kind of a hiccup there, but I will advise everyone later today or perhaps tomorrow. And the end of our Tuesday meeting is just to clear up, we had kind of that issue with the motion that was not very clear that got passed regarding Indigenous procurement. So I'm just going to, we'll spend hopefully about 15 minutes just to clear up that motion. Nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was short but good.